Texas Panhandle, August 1874. The wind carried the smell of scorched wood and blood through the canyon when Sani Elk Runner spotted the smoke rising beyond the ridge. He pressed his heels to his horse's sides and rode fast, the sun burning low behind him, casting a long shadow across the dry earth. He had seen raids like this before, settler wagons torn apart, people scattered like broken branches. But this one was different. There was no sound but the creak of the wind through the broken canvas when he stepped into the clearing. The wagon stood alone, wheels sunk in dust, its sides splintered and scorched. A lantern lay tipped over in the dirt. A man's body slumped nearby, already stiff. A woman's scream never came, but he heard her breath, sharp and fast, behind the wagon. He rounded the corner and stopped cold. She was chained to the iron ring bolted beneath the wagon bed, wrists rubbed raw, dress torn at the hem and caked with dust. Her face was streaked with tears, but she didn't cry anymore. She just stared at him with wide, defiant eyes. "Do not touch me," she said, voice hoarse but steady. Sani didn't move. He crouched slowly, palms open. "I am not here to hurt you," he said quietly. "My name is Sani. I saw the smoke." "You with them?" she asked, eyeing the Comanche patterns on his shirt. "No," he said. "Those men are dead." She looked past him to the bodies lying near the fire pit. Her shoulders sagged and she closed her eyes. He waited, letting the silence stretch. "I am Adalyn Vance," she whispered. "They bought me from a trader 2 weeks ago." Sani stepped closer and knelt. "May I see the chain?" She hesitated, then shifted to let him. The iron links were rusted but thick, and the padlock was still intact. He pulled a knife from his boot and worked the blade into the lock. It resisted, then gave with a snap. The chain fell. Adalyn gasped like someone tasting air after drowning. She pulled her arms close and buried her face in her knees. Sani stood and turned away, giving her space. He could still hear her breathing, fast and shallow. "Why did you help me?" she asked after a moment. He looked back at her. "Because no one else did." She looked up. Her eyes were gray-blue, like a storm rolling across the plains. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once. "You are free now." She blinked as though the words were too big to hold. Then her lip trembled. "I do not know where to go." Sani crouched again, meeting her eyes. "You do not have to go anywhere yet. You will come with me. There is a stream not far. We will camp. You can rest." Adalyn stared at him, trying to find a lie in his face. But there was nothing there but quiet certainty. She stood, legs shaking beneath her, and followed him. They stopped near a cottonwood grove by dusk. Sani lit a fire while Adalyn washed at the creek, scrubbing the grime from her skin with shaking hands. She did not speak much, and he did not ask. When she returned, he handed her a blanket and turned away as she changed. She sat across from him, knees drawn to her chest. The fire crackled between them. Her voice broke the silence. "They were headed to Santa Fe. Said they would sell me again." Sani looked at her. "You are not theirs anymore." Adalyn nodded, though her hands were clenched tight in the blanket. "You speak English well." "I learned it young," he said. "From a missionary woman. She died one winter. Fever." She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. His face was sharp but kind, with a deep scar near his jaw. His eyes were dark and steady. "You live alone?" "My people live near Elk Creek. But I ride alone now." She lowered her eyes. "I have not been alone since they took me. Not once." "You are safe now." Adalyn drew in a breath. "You do not know what they did. What they said. I was nothing to them." Sani leaned forward slightly. "You are not nothing." The words caught her off guard. Her eyes filled again, but no tears fell. She only watched him for a long moment. Then she said, one whisper. "That was all it took." He tilted his head. "What?" "You said one thing. You are free now." "No one ever said that before." Sani's voice was calm. "Because it was true." She held his gaze. Something in her chest eased for the first time in weeks. They traveled slow the next day, Sani riding ahead, Adalyn behind on his spare horse. Her wrists still ached, but her back was straight. She did not ask questions, and he did not push her to. On the third night, she asked, "Why do you ride alone?" He poked at the fire. "My brother died last winter. I did not want to stay without him." "I'm sorry," she said softly. "The land helps me remember him." She nodded. I lost my mother to illness, father to debt. I was alone before they took me. I think I forgot how to be anything else. You are not alone now. She met his eyes. I know. After 5 days, they reached the edge of Comanche land near Elk Creek. Sani stopped beneath a small grove of trees, his horse shifting beneath him. We can go on, he said. Or we can stay a while. There is good land here. Water. Quiet. Adalyn looked at the hills, the sun warm on her shoulders, and then at him. I want to stay, she said. He nodded, dismounted, and tied the horses. She stepped down beside him, closer than before. That night she built the fire. They sat beside it, silent, until she said, You saved me. Sani looked at her. No, I saw you. You saved yourself. She touched his arm. I want to stay with you, Sani. Not for safety. For you. His breath caught, but he did not look away. You are brave, he said. You are strong. I was only surviving, she whispered. But now I want to live. With you. He reached out and took her hand. His touch was warm, steady. I want that too, he said simply. And beneath the wide Texas sky, they sat close, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm wrapping around her like she belonged there. Because she did. The cabin stood a half-day's ride from the creek, tucked into a shallow hollow where the wind passed soft between cottonwoods. Sani had built it with his brother 3 winters before, its walls of hand-hewn pine and the roof pitched low to hold off the snow. The door hung straight, the hinges never rusted. He hadn't opened it since the burial. Adalyn stood by while he lifted the latch. Dust curled into the air, catching the sun like flour. She stepped inside, slow, running her hand over the wooden table, the rough wool blanket folded on the cot. Nothing had been disturbed, but the room held a stillness that made her pause. He watched her, leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. You sure? He asked. She turned. You brought me here? I brought you where it's quiet. You don't owe me this. She stepped toward him, her bare feet silent on the wood. I want to make something with my own hands, not just pass through. He nodded once, moved aside so she could open the shutters. Light spilled in, touching the floor in long stripes. He didn't speak again until she'd swept out the dust and laid the blanket fresh across the cot. I'll sleep outside, he said. You don't have to. He met her gaze. I know. That night, he unrolled his bedding beneath the stars while she curled on the cot. The cabin door left open to the air between them. By the 4th morning, she'd patched the holes in the roof using strips of canvas and a borrowed needle. She didn't ask for instruction. Her stitches were uneven, but they held. Sani watched from the pasture, saddle slung over one shoulder. You sew like you mean it. She shaded her eyes with the back of her hand. I was a seamstress once. Before. He walked up, brushing dust from his trousers. Before what? Before the railroad passed through my town. Before the man who ran the boarding house sold our lease to a gambler from St. Louis. Before I lost the room and the work and the name I used. He didn't answer for a long time. Then, what name did you use? Anna, she said. Short for Adalyn. I thought it sounded less unfinished. He looked at her, long and quiet. Adalyn suits you. She lowered her eyes, then nodded once. They worked side by side through late summer. She dug a garden bed in the hard soil behind the cabin while he mended the pen for the horses. Some days they spoke little, the breeze their only companion. Other days they shared stories in fragments, his first bow, her mother's rhubarb pie, the time a hawk landed on the fence post and didn't fly off for hours. One dry afternoon, she found him carving a small figure from a piece of cedar. His knife steady, curls of wood gathering in his lap. What is it? She asked. He didn't look up. Something for the windowsill. So you know it's your place, too. She crouched beside him. The carving was a sparrow, wings tucked close. The feathers weren't perfect, but they held a kind of movement. You see things how they really are, she said. No, he replied. I see what could be. She watched his hands, the way they worked with care, not rush. Her voice was quiet. When I was chained, I stopped believing in any kind of future. I thought I'd die that way. He set the carving down. You didn't. No, she said. I didn't. He reached for her hand. She let him take it, the calluses of his palm warm against her skin. I don't want to remember what happened before, she said. You don't have to forget it, he told her. But you don't have to live inside it anymore. Her breath caught, not from fear, but from the sudden ease in his words. By the end of September, the garden yielded small root vegetables, turnips, carrots, a few stringy beets. She lined shelves with jars and dried herbs wrapped in muslin. He brought back venison and wild onions from the hills and once a copper kettle from a nearby trader when he returned from a 2-day ride. She met him at the door, arms crossed, trying not to smile. You traded a rifle for that kettle? No, he said, brushing dust from his hat. I traded a story. She lifted an eyebrow. About a woman who could stitch a roof back onto a home with nothing but thread and stubbornness. She laughed, then a full, bright sound that startled them both. That night, she cooked stew in the kettle and they ate by lantern light. She reached across and touched his wrist. You've given me more than I came here with. He looked at her hand, then at her. You gave it back to yourself, he said. She held his gaze. I don't want to sleep alone anymore. He didn't move. Are you sure? She nodded. I'm not afraid of the quiet. Not when you're in it. He stood, crossed to her, and took her face in his hands. There was no rush, no tremble. Just the slow, steady breath of two people who had walked through fire and found one another on the other side. When they lay down that night, it was not out of need or rescue. It was choice. It was trust. And when the wind passed through the cottonwoods just before dawn, it sounded like peace. October brought colder winds that pressed low through the trees, carrying the scent of dry leaves and the distant tang of ash from someone's fire across the hills. Adalyn stood at the woodpile, sleeves rolled, stacking split logs with a rhythm that soothed more than it tired. Her fingers no longer trembled when she worked. The skin at her wrists had begun to heal, though the scars would always trace her like faint rope. Inside, Sani sat stringing a new bough, his hands working the sinew tight against the curve of seasoned Osage wood. The silence between them had grown comfortable, each of them learning where the other fit in the quiet. He didn't look up when she came in, only asked, You feel the cold coming? She set the last of the wood by the hearth. It's in my teeth this morning. He nodded, biting the end of the string. We'll need to smoke more meat. I saw elk sign near the southern ridge. She pulled off her gloves and warmed her hands by the stove. I'll start salting what we have left. He paused, then glanced toward the cupboard. There's a trap I haven't checked in 2 days. If something's there, I'll bring it back before dusk. She turned, drying her hands on her skirt. You want me to come? He hesitated, then shook his head. No, the trail's narrow, and the snow's coming early this year. I'll go light. She watched him wrap his bowing cloth. You always walk it? He tightened the knot at the end. My brother and I did. The path's too tight for horses. It was our way of getting out from under too much noise. A beat passed before she said, What did you leave behind when he died? He stood slowly, his face unreadable. The sound of someone knowing me before I had to speak. She nodded, eyes lowered. I think I've only just started hearing myself again. He crossed to her, fingers brushing her sleeve. I hear you. After he rode out, Adalyn tidied the shelves, turned the mattress, and stitched a tear in the curtain near the stove. The movements kept her from counting the hours, but when the sun slipped behind the hills and he hadn't returned, she lit the lantern and stepped out into the dusk. The trail ran east along the creek, then cut into a narrow draw where the trees thickened. She didn't stray far, just far enough to feel the wind funneling down from the ridge. A hawk circled above, then dipped behind the trees. She waited with her arms crossed tight, the lantern's glow flickering against her skirt. The sound of hooves pulled her breath tight until his shape emerged through the trees, his horse trailing a second one, and something heavy slung across its back. He dismounted without a word, eyes scanning her face. You're cold, he said. I'm fine, she answered. Is that elk? Half of one, he said. The other half's hanging near the ridge. I'll bring it back tomorrow. She stepped forward, brushing pine needles from his shoulder. You cut your hand, she said. He looked down. Rope slipped when I was tying the legs. She took his hand and turned it toward the light. Come inside. He didn't argue. She cleaned the cut in silence, her touch firm but careful. When she tied the cloth around his palm, he said, "I've never had anyone wait for me before." She met his eyes. "I didn't mean to worry." "You didn't," he said. "But it mattered." Later, he watched her from the doorway while she stirred the pot over the stove. Her hair had come loose from the braid, and the gold of the firelight caught the curve of her cheek. He stepped forward, slow. "You filled this place with breath again," he said. She turned, spoon in hand. It was never empty. It just needed to be lived in. He took the spoon from her, set it aside, and folded her into his arms. She leaned against him, her face near his collarbone, her voice warm against his skin. "I don't flinch anymore when the wind snaps the shutters." He kissed the top of her head. "Because now you know what it is." She nodded against him. "It's just the wind." "And I'm not afraid of it." That night, as the coals settled and the floorboards creaked with the settling cold, they lay close beneath the thick quilt she had sewn from scraps. No words passed between them, only the shared breath of two hearts that had learned to beat steady again. Outside, a thin frost touched the grass, and the stars wheeled slow above the trees. Inside, the silence was no longer empty. It was full of promise. The first snow came in the night, quiet as breath. By morning, the ground wore a thin white veil, and the branches outside the cabin bowed under the weight of it. Adalyn stepped out onto the porch with a blanket draped over her shoulders, her boots crunching lightly as she walked the length of the steps. Sani was already at the edge of the clearing, tying a line between two trees. He turned when he heard her footsteps, his breath rising in clouds. "You're awake early," he said. "I dreamed of water," she replied. "A river so wide I couldn't see the far bank." He finished looping the rope and came toward her. "In our stories, dreaming of water means something's shifting." She didn't answer right away. The snow softened the world, dulled the sharpness of distance. "I think I'm ready to stop waiting for something to take this away." He stood beside her, watching the tree line. "You already have. You just didn't believe it yet." She looked up at him. "What do you believe about me?" "That you're still growing," he said. "And that's a strength." She nodded, then turned back into the cabin. She had begun stitching a quilt from the last of the cloth scraps, piecing it together not for need, but for beauty. She worked with a steady hand, the design forming slow and deliberate, a circle bordered by lines that reached outward. Later, while she worked, he carved a new spindle for the loom she'd asked about the week before. He hadn't touched the thing since he and his brother had hauled it from a trader's wagon 3 winters ago. It stood in the corner near the hearth and used but not forgotten. "You remembered," she said, setting the quilt aside. "You asked," he replied, testing the spindle's balance between his fingers. She rested a hand on the frame. "My mother taught me on one like this." She said weaving keeps a woman's thoughts from getting tangled. He adjusted the tension with careful fingers. "Do you want to finish what she started?" Adalyn smiled gently. "I want to start something of my own." By the week's end, she'd begun weaving again, her fingers guiding the shuttle with quiet assurance. The loom clicked softly through the morning while Sani repaired the fence near the grove, his coat lined with fur against the cold. At midday, she brought him a tin cup of broth, still steaming. He took it, nodding his thanks, and leaned against the fence post. "You ever think about leaving here?" She looked out at the hills. "Not anymore." He sipped the broth, then handed the cup back. "I think about building another room, one with more light." She tilted her head. "For the loom. For what comes next." The air was still around them, the snow thickening with each hour. She reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out a small strip of woven cloth, blue and ochre in a rising pattern. "I made this for you," she said. "It's not finished, but it's yours." He took it, turning it over in his hands. "It looks like sunrise. That's what I was thinking about when I made it." He tucked the cloth into his coat. "I'll carry it with me." That night, they sat close by the hearth. The fire cast long shadows across the beams and the kettle hissed low. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He rested his hand on her knee. I used to think love was something that came with promises, she said. Big ones. Loud. His voice was low beside her. And now, I think love is quiet. It just stays. He kissed her temple, slow and sure. Then I'll stay. She turned, eyes steady, and met his mouth with hers, no urgency, just the deep, rooted certainty of something that had taken hold and would not shake loose. When dawn came, the light found them wrapped in that quiet, the quilt she had made pulled up to their chins, the snow outside falling thicker than before. But inside, the warmth held. They were not waiting anymore. They were already home. The snow deepened in the weeks that followed, blanketing the earth in thick folds that softened every sound. Sani rose early, often before the light reached the horizon, leaving Adalyn tucked warm beneath the quilt. He moved through the mornings with quiet purpose, checking snares, hauling water from the spring with steam rising off the buckets, splitting wood before the frost climbed too high up the bark. Adalyn's days unfolded in rhythm with his, though she had begun to shape her own hours. By mid-morning, she was weaving again, her fingers growing quicker on the shuttle, the cloth beneath her hands lengthening in neat, purposeful lines. She had begun to dye the wool with crushed berries, layering in color that echoed the land-muddy clay reds, faded moss greens, the pale blue of frostbitten sky. One afternoon, as she twisted thread by the hearth, she paused and looked toward the door. "Would it matter to you if I wrote to someone?" she asked, her voice low. Sani looked up from his place at the table, where he was sharpening a knife. "Who?" "My cousin's boy, Isaac. He was half-raised with me. He might still be in Kansas. If he's alive, he'd want to know I'm not buried in some ditch." He set down the blade. "It doesn't matter to me if you do. If it matters to you, then you should." She nodded, then added, "I wouldn't tell him where we are, just that I lived." Sani returned to the knife. "That's yours to decide." She didn't write that day, but she set a scrap of paper aside, folded once, and placed it under a tin cup on the windowsill. That night, after they'd eaten, she traced circles on his forearm where he leaned back against the cot, eyes half closed. "Do you miss riding far?" He opened his eyes. "Sometimes. Not the restlessness. Just the land. Would you take me with you if we ever went?" He turned toward her. "I would never leave you behind." She smiled, then said, "I think I'd like to see the desert, the dry places where things still bloom." He nodded. "We could ride west come spring. Just a few weeks. I know where the cactus flowers come first." "I'd like that," she said. "But not before we finish the new room." The next morning, they began marking the ground outside the cabin for the addition. The frost made the dirt stiff, but Sani worked the spade in slow, firm strokes while Adalyn measured the frame with lengths of cord. They spoke little, the cold biting their breath short, but their movements were in sync, passing tools, gauging angles, drawing chalk lines on the cabin wall. When the sun reached its peak, she stood back and studied the outline they'd carved into the snow-packed earth. "You think it'll hold?" she asked. He looked at the line, then at her. "If we build it together, it will." By midwinter, the walls were up. The roof came slow, with Sani working from dawn to dusk and Adalyn passing him nails, holding joints steady, fetching water from the spring in a kettle when the pump froze. She never complained of the wind or the cold. Her fingers cracked, but she rubbed them with tallow at night and said nothing of the sting. One evening, as they sat near the fire with a bowl of dried apple slices between them, Adalyn shifted in her chair. "I want to marry you," she said, not looking at him. "I don't need a preacher, but I want the truth of it in the world." Sani set his cup down. "You sure?" "I don't want to belong to you," she said, "but I want to walk beside you. In every way." He reached for her hand, calloused palm closing over hers. "Then we'll make it true between us." She opened the drawer beside the hearth and pulled out 2 thin bands of copper she'd hammered herself from a scrap basin. "I made these weeks ago. I was waiting." He took one, held it against the light. "No one's ever made me anything before," he said. She smiled. "Then you'll have to get used to it." They exchanged the rings by lamplight, hands steady, words few. No one witnessed it but the fire and the frost on the windows. And that was enough. In the weeks that followed, they finished the room. Adalyn moved the loom into the corner near the window where the light fell best in the mornings. Sani built a chest from pine slats and lined it with wool so she could store her weavings flat. They hung a small strip of cloth above the door, dyed with marigold and stitched with a single line of thread in white, the only piece she had made with no pattern, only instinct. "You never told me what that one meant," he said one morning. "It means we made it through," she said. "And we're still here." That spring, when the snow melted and the creek ran high, they rode west for 13 days. They saw the desert bloom, red blossoms bursting from spiny arms, and they slept under stars that wheeled wider than any sky Adalyn had known. They returned to their cabin in late April, sunburnt, quiet, content. And when the rains came, they came gently. Years passed. The cabin never shifted. The walls stayed straight, the roof tight. Adalyn's weaving became known in the surrounding towns not for its beauty, though it was that, but for the way it held stories in shape and color. Sani kept riding, but never far. He brought back herbs, cedar bark, once a bundle of wild tobacco someone from his brother's clan had left for him near the ridge. They never lived loud, but they lived deep. One morning, long after the last snow had melted, Adalyn stood on the porch with her hand on her belly, watching the wind move through the trees. Sani came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Boy or girl?" he asked. She smiled. "We'll wait and see." He pressed his cheek to her hair. "We'll make room either way." They stood like that for a long time, the sun warm on their backs, the world unfolding slow and sure before them. And nothing ever took it away.